Aunt Cassie! Charles, my grandson, happily ran towards her, his long hair swaying. My daughter and I hurriedly followed him. Cassie, my sister-in-law, looked surprised to see Charles running towards her. Who? It seemed Cassie didn't recognize him as Charles. He had grown taller and his hair was longer since the last time they met. Cassie, it's been a while. This is my son, Charles. What? This kid? She stared at Charles with wide eyes. Then started murmuring softly to herself, as if she was beginning to remember. I thought you looked familiar, but you. She looked Charles up and down, from his face and hair to his build and height. For a guy, that's pretty creepy, lol. I wouldn't want to be associated with you. I felt like my heart stopped at her cutting words. Knowing why he had been growing his hair out, it was unbearable for me. That's terrible. Apologize. When I confronted Cassie, Charles tugged at the hem of my clothes. Turning around, I saw him smiling. Grandma, it's okay. But... Charles looked straight at Cassie. I actually wanted to give this to Aunt Cassie, sorry it's late. What? As Charles said this, Cassie looked at him, puzzled. Yes, Cassie was the reason Charles had decided to grow his hair out. My name is Sophie. I'm a housewife in my 60s. My husband Rob is also in his 60s. He has a few more years until retirement and still goes to work every day. Today, like every day, I made him a sandwich and saw him off. The quiet man took the sandwich, said, I'm off, and left quietly. It's just my husband and I, and our daughter Anne. I missed the days when Anne would oversleep and rush around in the morning. Back then, I was working as a preschool teacher and Anne and I would hustle every morning. And, now, has been married for several years and is a mother to one child. After giving birth, she bought a house near our home with her husband Woody and their son Charles, and they started living there. Do you really need to live near us? But this area has parks and supermarkets close by, and it's good for raising children. Plus, Mom is here. It was obvious my daughter was hinting at wanting me to help take care of her son. Just so you know, I won't be taking care of Charles. I still have to go to work. Caught me, huh? She laughed nervously, twirling her hair around her finger. A habit she has when she's asking for a favor. Actually, I've been wanting to return to work and have been looking for childcare, but it's hard to find. Before getting married, and was a career woman working as an editor at a publishing company. Often working on multiple projects until the last train of the night. It's surprising she even found time to look for a partner in her busy schedule. If only I could leave him with Mom, who's a trained preschool teacher, I'd feel so much safer. And looked at me pleadingly. No way. I've finally finished raising my own children and have started to enjoy my own time. I've even picked up new hobbies. I've kept it a secret from Anne and Rob, but my room is now filled with merchandise and posters of my favorite artist. Unless there's a special circumstance, please don't rely on me. Special circumstance? And looked up, as if she had an idea. What is it? Well, it turns out Charles is more susceptible to illness than other kids, and he often gets fevers even during trial daycare. Trial daycare is a period designed for children to get accustomed to the childcare center. So, I end up being called almost every day, and the teachers at the center look troubled too. It's a problem even before getting used to it. I just can't stand the teachers' looks anymore. Personally, I think one option could be for Anne to postpone her return to work until Charles grows a bit more. But then, what about the career she's built? When I returned to work and was in middle school, I struggled, after a break of over 10 years, getting scolded by colleagues who were more than a decade younger than me. I didn't want to go through the same hardship, so after some thought, I said, "All right. But I can't decide on my own, so I'll discuss it with Dad first." "Really? Are you sure?" "Don't get your hopes up, it's not decided yet." "Okay. Just talking about it makes me happy. Thank you, Mom." That night, I told Rob I was thinking about quitting my job to take care of Charles. It was an unusually cold night, so I prepared some delicious mulled wine. "So, what do you think?" Rob pondered while sipping the mulled wine. He knew how much I loved working in childcare. Quitting was a big step, but he seemed to understand that. After our discussion, we decided to wait another month. If we still couldn't find a childcare center, then maybe it would be best to take care of Charles ourselves. And I were both satisfied with this decision, and we spent another month waiting. Eventually, we couldn't find a childcare center, so we decided to take care of Charles at our home. I resigned from the childcare center where I had worked for a long time and finished all the handover tasks. It was sad, but the thought of spending more time with my adorable grandson made it all worthwhile. Charles came to our house the day after I retired. On days when Rob was off work, Charles would clamber up to him as he relaxed on the sofa. At first, Rob seemed a bit troubled, but by noon, they seemed to have bonded, often napping together on the floor. "It's like we've got another child, isn't it?" Muttering about the happy troubles, I draped blankets over the two of them. Just as Anne said, Charles often came down with fevers. Each time, I'd take him to the doctor, get him examined, and pick up his medication. The drop-offs and pickups were no easy task. But when the fever subsided and Charles was back to running around energetically, it all felt worth it, and I couldn't help but feel happy. "Grandma, look!" Charles, who had just recently had trouble articulating his words, was now happily chatting away. Watching my grandson grow, I occasionally rushed to support my daughter and her husband. Time flew, and Charles grew up, reaching the upper grades of elementary school. He no longer got sick with fevers, and he mingled and chatted with his classmates, attending lessons just like them. Around this time, he began to grow his hair out, wearing it in a ponytail that reached his shoulders every day to school. Some classmates teased him, saying things like, "You look like a girl, or when are you going to cut your hair?" "It's okay, I've decided to grow it out," he confidently responded to their thoughtless remarks without being intimidated. Due to his gentle demeanor and personality, he was sometimes mistaken for a girl when out and about. Even when going to the restroom at a department store, Charles was stopped by a customer who mistakenly thought a girl was entering the men's restroom because of his long hair. I was surprised to hear about it later, but Charles simply laughed it off without any concern. "This lady told me with such a panicked face, 'That's the men's room over there.'" "Really, now?" "And when I said I'm a boy, she was so surprised." Charles shared the story, laughing. I combed his hair, impressed by his attitude. "Grandma, how long is it now?" About 0.6 feet, maybe?" "Then I need to grow it out more." Saying that, Charles tied his hair back into a ponytail and headed off to school. His hair had grown quite long, but his classmates no longer teased him about it. As the seasons changed, Charles began to spend more time with his friends, gradually needing less of my assistance. This also meant I had more time for my hobbies. The artist on the posters in my room is now handling theme songs for dramas and movies. I haven't been to a live performance in years, but maybe I can go once Charles is in middle school. I'm looking forward to it a little as time passes and seasons change, leading to Charles graduating from elementary school. After a slightly long break, it's time for middle school. That day, after adjusting work schedules, my daughter, her husband, and I went out for a meal for the first time in a while. Charles, your hair has gotten really long, hasn't it? Yeah, it's probably about 1.6 feet long now. Charles's hair had grown down to his lower back. Maybe it's enough? Did anyone say anything about it in your new class? No one says anything, and even if they do, it's fine. Charles laughed as usual. Seeing him unchanged even as he entered middle school was somewhat reassuring for me. But it might be time to cut his hair soon. In middle school, with stricter rules and possibly student guidance issues, teachers might have something to say about it. I've been thinking about talking to Charles about it soon. And said, changing the subject. We have a family gathering coming up soon, right? It's a birthday party, isn't it? Oh, right. That's next month, isn't it? Yes, exactly. Courtney is turning 103. She's lived a long life, hasn't she? After picturing the face of my great-aunt Courtney, another person's face came to mind. It was Cassie. She's Rob's sister, apparently has no intention of marrying, and I've heard she's still single. Cassie, being Courtney's daughter, would likely attend the birthday party as well. She used to play with Charles a lot and they had a good relationship. However, she fell ill a few years ago and was undergoing treatment. I knew she had quit her job due to her illness. But there's been no word from her since then. I haven't heard anything about her current situation from Rob, her own brother. I couldn't even remember the last time I saw her healthy. That night, I decided to ask Rob about Cassie. Hey, how's Cassie doing? It seemed Rob occasionally kept in touch with her. That was when I first learned she had changed her phone number. Wasn't working and tended to stay indoors. I also found out that she seemed somewhat irritable on the phone. So, is she coming to the birthday party? When I asked, Rob just said, I don't know, and shrugged his shoulders in a troubled way. I was worried whether it would be okay for her to attend in such a state. But I couldn't shake off the desire to see Cassie again. I guess we'll just have to see how things go. With that thought, I focused on my revived hobby. Listening to my favorite artists' music and wondering if I could get tickets to their next live show. As I did, the night deepened. Courtney's birthday was on a pleasantly clear winter day. Since going out was difficult for her, we all gathered at Courtney's home. She was lying in a care bed, dressed in a lovely light purple cardigan. Her hearing wasn't great anymore, but I looked into her eyes, took her hand, and wished her a happy birthday. Looking over at Rob, his usually quiet demeanor was gone, and he was happily chatting with other relatives. Despite everything, it seems they really do get along well. I casually looked around the area. I glanced around, wondering if Cassie had come. Sure enough, she was standing alone in a corner of the room. Cassie. Long time no see. I approached her with a quick pace and greeted her. Cassie looked bored, but when she noticed me, she slightly furrowed her brow. Ah, who are you again? It's Sophie. Have you recovered from your illness? You can see, can't you? I'm here because I'm better. Don't make me say it. Just like Rob said, her attitude was much colder than before. Feeling a bit overwhelmed, I responded. I'm sorry. But I'm glad you're better. There's nothing good about having recovered. But we can meet and talk like this again. So what? Do you want to boast about how you've never been sick and have built your career, to me? What? No, that's not what I meant. Please, just stop involving yourself with me. It's bothersome. She turned away and quickly disappeared from in front of me. Watching her back, I felt incredibly lonely. The Cassie I knew was more generous, celebrated others' successes, and had a wonderful smile. Her lustrous hair used to fall to her back, and when it fluttered in the wind, she looked like a beauty out of a painting. However, the Cassie here seemed like a completely different, almost opposite person. She had become very introverted and seemed bitter. Her once cherished hair was now cut short, showing noticeable gray, lacking its former gloss. Could an illness really change someone so drastically? I guess I understand why Rob shrugged his shoulders. Self-destructive. That's the word that comes to mind. Regaining my composure, I turned around to go and greet the other people. Just then, I caught sight of my daughter and her husband coming from the opposite direction. Grandma! Charles had come in his finest outfit for going out. His long hair swayed with his movements to the right and left. Charles, you look very handsome today. Mom, did you get to talk to Cassie? I did, but she quickly went off somewhere. I see. And seemed a bit disappointed. Is something wrong with Cassie? Yeah, Charles wanted to see her, so we were hoping she'd be here today. I felt a rush of anxiety inside. Was it really okay to let Charles meet her in her current state? The difference from before might shock him. I had a bad feeling about this. Mom, do you know where Cassie went? Well, I'm not sure. I kept my answer vague. But, as if on cue, Charles spotted Cassie at that moment. Aunt Cassie! Charles happily ran towards her, his long hair swaying. And I hurried after him. Cassie looked surprised to see Charles running towards her. Who? It seemed Cassie didn't recognize him as Charles. Likely because he had grown taller and his hair was longer since their last meeting. Cassie, long time no see. This is my son, Charles. What? This kid? She stared at Charles with wide eyes. Then began to murmur softly to herself, as if she was starting to remember. I thought you looked familiar, but you. She looked Charles up and down, from his face and hair to his build and height. For a guy, that's pretty creepy, lol. I wouldn't want to be associated with you. I felt as if my heart stopped at her cutting words. Knowing why he had been growing his hair out, it was unbearable for me. That's terrible. Apologize. When I confronted Cassie, Charles tugged at the hem of my clothes. Turning around, I saw him smiling. Grandma, it's okay. But... Charles looked straight at Cassie. I actually wanted to give this to Aunt Cassie, but it's a bit late, sorry. What? I've been growing my hair to donate it through hair donation. Hair donation? Cassie was unfamiliar with what hair donation was. Her confused expression made it clear to me. Hair donation is an activity where people donate their hair to make wigs for medical purposes. Donate hair? Yes. And those wigs are provided for free to people who have lost their hair due to illness or injury. Cassie looked perplexed. So, he's doing this for me? But why? We haven't seen each other in so long. Because we couldn't see you, Cassie. Indeed, Cassie was the reason Charles decided to take on hair donation. It all started from his wish to see her again. Going back in time, when Charles was younger and I started taking care of him. It was physically challenging for me alone, so I often relied on my in-laws' help. Back then, Cassie was living with my in-laws too. Whenever we visited, Charles wouldn't get sick and enjoyed playing with Cassie. While taking care of her parents, she would make Charles's favorite snacks. And even took us on short trips when she had long weekends, showing how much she cared for him. However, in early autumn one year, Cassie fell ill and was hospitalized. I was shocked and thought about taking Charles to visit her. But Cassie insisted. Don't come, just stop. And refused to see me or Charles. I later heard she didn't want to see her parents or close friends either. Why was that? When I wasn't taking care of Charles, I secretly went to the hospital and talked to the nurses. I found out that Cassie had lost her hair due to the side effects of her medication and was refusing to see people. The pain of losing her hair was something only Cassie could understand. At that time, there was nothing I could do but watch over her from a distance. I wondered whether I should tell Charles about this. When can I see Aunt Cassie? Even after advancing from the childcare center to elementary school, Charles was always concerned about Cassie. I was hesitant, but I decided to tell Charles about Cassie's situation. Her hospitalization due to illness, the side effects of her medication, and how losing her hair had been a difficult experience for her. I'll never forget his response after listening intently to everything I shared. Is there something I can do, too? He was just 10 years old but seemed deeply contemplative, likely influenced by his frequent hospital visits from a young age. I learned much later that Cassie had been discharged a few years after her hospitalization. When Charles reached the upper grades of elementary school, he learned about hair donation in a school lesson. During the class, a representative from an NPO came in, and they showed actual wigs and watched video messages from people who had worn them. Coming home excited, Charles declared, "I'm going to do hair donation. I want Aunt Cassie to have one." Hair donation. At the time, and didn't understand either, but later grasped the concept after researching it online. Charles, beaming with pride, came to me and announced his decision to donate his hair. And so, Charles has been growing his hair for these past 3 years, all the way until today, to this length. Why would you go to such lengths? Aunt Cassie, I wanted to see you truly smile again, and I wanted to spend time with you again. Oh. Even when teased by classmates or mistaken for a girl, that was Charles's only wish, Cassie. Cassie looked back and forth between Charles and me, her eyes filling with tears. Oh. Aunt Cassie? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Charles. I was awful, wasn't I? I hurriedly pulled out a handkerchief and offered it to her. After I suddenly got sick and had to quit my job, I fell into a deep depression. Struggling for words, Cassie slowly began to open up. It was devastating. Losing my hair, not being able to meet anyone, I thought my life was over. That's not true. I felt so miserable. And because I was in a hurry to get better, I couldn't forgive myself. Tears continuously streamed down Cassie's face, likely sharing these feelings for the first time. I offered her a pack of pocket tissues as well. I started lashing out at people. I even said terrible things to Rob. I remembered what Rob had said. He had mentioned that she was somewhat irritable on the phone. So, there was a reason for that behavior. Rob has always been worried about Cassie. If you explain the situation, I'm sure he'll understand. I've been awful not just to Charles and Rob, but to everyone. I'm truly sorry. Crying and sniffling, she expressed her remorse. I don't mind at all. Please don't cry, Aunt Cassie. That's right, Cassie. And I'm sorry too for not realizing how you felt and for speaking harshly earlier. I hugged Cassie. She cried unabashedly. Something we hadn't been able to do for years, not knowing how to interact with each other. I never imagined that today we would reconcile, tears and all. Come on, no more crying. Let's celebrate together. After a good cry, Cassie joined in celebrating Courtney's birthday. The following Sunday, I headed to the hair salon. Not for my haircut, but for Charles's. And her husband were also there. It seems the school finally told him to cut his hair. Apparently, a teacher had called him aside after class for a talk. Despite explaining it was for hair donation, they said it wasn't a valid reason since there was no precedent. Some people just can't be flexible. But I was planning to cut it anyway, so it's okay. Charles sat in the chair, his hair being divided into several sections. Once his hair was tied up, Charles slowly cut the first section. Everyone watched tensely, and a sigh of relief escaped when it was done. The hairstylist was also surprised by the length of his hair. "You really did a great job growing it out. It must have been hard to dry it." I turned around at the familiar voice and saw Cassie. I had invited her to join us here. "Hee, I used a lot of shampoo and conditioner." Charles handed the scissors back to the hairstylist and had the rest of his hair cut. Everyone, including Charles, and Woody, and Cassie, marveled at the long strands that had been cut. "It feels weird not having hair." He kept touching his hair, seemingly curious about its new length. Charles got a short haircut and was smiling with a refreshed look. "Any hairstyle suits you because you're always smiling, Charles." "And Cassie, you changed your hairstyle too. It looks good on you." Thank you." After the birthday party, Cassie had decided to change her look and cut her hair very short. She even dyed her gray hair, looking much younger. "I've done enough moping around. I'm going to start job hunting again." She seemed more spirited than before her illness, which made me happy. Charles was focusing on his studies and club activities, enjoying his school life. Cassie and I also rekindled our friendship and focused on our hobbies. I introduced her to some of my favorite artists' songs, and she became a fan. I listen to them every day, they really uplift me. "How about we go to their next tour live together?" "Yes, I'd love to." Of course, this was a secret from Rob and Charles. Being able to laugh with her now feels like a true miracle. Yet, sometimes I wish I had noticed Cassie's feelings earlier. I only watched from afar and didn't offer the support she needed. I had given up on searching for something I could do, resigning to inaction. That slight regret lingers in my heart. Charles, on his own initiative, thought about what he could do, found it, and actually went through with it. I believe it required a great deal of courage, and I am in awe of his proactive approach. Taking action seems simple yet is profoundly challenging. However, Charles's attitude taught me the paramount importance of action. Now, leveraging my experience as a preschool teacher, I've started volunteering in the pediatric ward of a hospital. It's a wonderful activity where I entertain children who are hospitalized or visiting for treatment. I engage in drawing with the children and the nurses, and sometimes read them storybooks. Occasionally, I'm also asked to help with decorations for events, where my experience as a preschool teacher proves invaluable. I may get a bit too enthusiastic at times, but that's unavoidable. Of course, the goal isn't just to create fun times. These children are bravely battling invisible illnesses every day. The hardships and pain they endure, and the loneliness of not having someone to share these with, can be overwhelming. I do my best to be there for them, to cry with them, and to laugh with them. I never forget to tell them, if there's anything I can do. Just let me know, ensuring they don't feel alone like Cassie did. I want them to believe they have allies. As I continue my efforts, I make sure not to let any of them feel isolated. The next event is Easter. I plan to make Easter eggs and bring them to the children, hoping to bring them a bit of joy.